Tossing a moon. I hold a moon, a cold moonstone, moon-like stone, in my ungloved hand, then toss it high into the air, into the sea. A stone that mirrors the moon itself, floating all cool and pale up in the daylit sky. Welcome to the latest floating poetry broadcast, and thank you for leaning in to the 97th show in my ongoing weekly series, coming to you live from the unwintering coast of Rhode Island. This is your poet and poetorialist, Colin Goedecke, a voice for living our days more poetically, more expressively, more soulfully. Broadcast 96 was about raising your sail to catch every fair wind you can in your days, setting sail on every favorable tide life offers you, and being an intrepid mariner, voyager, whenever you sense the time is nigh to weigh anchor, leave your mooring, and go adventuring into new waters, in body, spirit, or imagination. This show is taking us, into the heat and the cold of all kinds, literal to imaginal, sensate to cinematic, from the searing heat of deserts to the wild cold of Arctic tundras, from being hotly passionate to being cool-headed, maybe cold-hearted or cold-shouldered. The sultry to the frisky, the quenching to the warmly fortifying, the feelings they evoke and the effects, challenges, and contrasts they offer. I hope the cultural commentary, poetry, and other material I've chosen for this broadcast give you a good touching into and touchstoning for your own experiences of many kinds of hot and cold. Let's begin with falling leaves and early snow. Kenneth Rexroth poem. In the years to come, they will say, they fell like the leaves in the autumn of 1939. November has come to the forest, to the meadows where we picked the cyclamen. The year fades with the white frost on the brown sedge in the hazy meadows, where the deer tracks were black in the morning. Ice forms in the shadows. Disheveled maples hang over the water. Deep gold sunlight glistens on the shrunken stream. Somnolent trout move through pillars of brown and gold. The yellow maple leaves eddy above them, the glittering leaves of the cottonwood, the olive, velvety alder leaves, the scarlet dogwood leaves, most poignant of all. In the afternoon, thin blades of cloud move over the mountains. The storm clouds follow them. Fine rain falls without wind. The forest is filled with wet, resonant silence. When the rain pauses, the clouds cling to the cliffs and the waterfalls. In the evening, the wind changes. Snow falls in the sunset. We stand in the snowy twilight and watch the moon rise in a breach of cloud. Between the black pines lie narrow bands of moonlight, glimmering with floating snow. An owl cries in the sifting darkness. The moon has a sheen like a glacier. Thank you, Kenneth Rexroth. John Gould Fletcher, who was an Imagist school poet back in time. This is the first part of his poem, By the Rio Grande, Desert. My dream of the desert was this: dense glare of the sunlight pouring over dune upon dune of white sand, windless, forever scouring, with here and there a sparse cactus outspread to the distant mountains, and at night the white light of the moon over the dim sand fountains. My day in the desert was this: deep sweep of the rain cloud going slowly, trailing its fringes, over upland valleys flowing, from the wall of the west to the east spreading its rainbowed edges, folding blue turbans upon the distant sky-poised ridges. My life in the desert was this: a drowning and awakening, like the rigid beat of a drum, and then the drum slowly slackening, the light breeze of the cool dawn, and the glow of the sunset scattered. Thank you, John Gould Fletcher. Here's Meredith Cole, Travels in the Desert. We were there once, having slept in a shivering white tent in a heat dying down, peeling salt from our arms and our stiff, oily hair on the soft pillows. Through the netted roof were stars. And deep down in the canyon, the water-shaped coves, and the walls of those coves painted by ancient Pueblo. They are gone. In the harsh moonlight, pots grow dusky near a dripping pool in these cooled cliffs, pots left behind, and corn in the stone grinders. Only paintings echo clues, with the white-yellow spiral, the wheat-yellow spiral, decoded as, quote, migration, or even as the line curves tightly inward or loosely out, quote, no return. The imprint of our tent is gone by now, and the wind that lifted the netting slowly as we breathed in sleep. And the marks I found in sand one morning while filling a pot with water, curved in the sand, fine lines of snakes, thin, exact to the delicate scaling, then a smooth tangle, then straight. The gliding track slid out to a distant bleached juniper and out, straight out, as far as I could see. Thank you, Meredith Cole, for that. This is a poem of mine, like Crusoe's Footsteps, from early March 2017. Instead of seeing them in the sand, I see them in the snow, the sole sign of another presence, since a demi-fierce nor'easter cloaked this woodland days before. On a castaway trail I explore between stretches of bare limbs, trunks, and hidden ground, my feet sinking and floating inches up and down through the frost whiteness, the frost coldness, as I trace ever farther into a late afternoon adventuring. It's a poem from Woodstock, New York. A Saturday stream. Cold water rushes over copper rocks. Iced water falls from melting mountaintops, pouring fish and smooth stones downstream to the clear, silver, swishing sound of cold water washing over copper rocks. I felt we might be interested in a slice of recounting by the pioneering polar explorer, physician, and ethnographer Frederick Cook about his time with the Belgian Antarctic expedition of 1897. This is from his book, Through the First Antarctic Night. Great nature writing. Takes you right there. He said in there, we have talked only of the discomforts of the night and of the misery. The long and broken darkness has not totally blinded us to its few real charms, which are strikingly brought out by the awful contrast of heat and cold, of light and darkness. As lovers of nature, we found many pleasures for the eye and the intellect in the flashing aurora australis, in the play of intense silvery moonlight over the mountainous seas of ice, and in the fascinating clearness of the starlight over the endless expanse of driven snows. There was a naked fierceness in the scenes, a boisterous wildness in the storms, a sublimity and silence in the still, cold, dayless nights, which were too impressive to be entirely overshadowed by the soul-despairing depression. The attractions of the polar night are not to be written in the language of a people who live in a land of sunshine and of flowers. They are found in a roughness, ruggedness, and severity, appreciated only by men who are fated to live in similar regions on the verge of another world, where animal sentiments take the place of the finer but less realistic human passions. Thank you, Frederick Cook. Very, very interesting. I hadn't come across that before. Many new things to me, which I love discovering, and with you as we go along. None of which I have rehearsed. I pull things together, they feel right, I take a glance, and we we add them to the mix. J.P. White has this poem. The Arctic balloonists talk to the ones they left behind. North, as always, lies the greater magnet fixed beneath the restless ice. No woman's shoulders are soft enough to stay home for. No Sunday stroll compares with the soul of a compass needle. Greatness sings at the upper elevations, sailing beyond familiar streets, pastry shops, and churches, out where wind shakes ocean swell into ridges and the blue white of snow casts shadows straight into the maw of the pole. We all felt this quiver and stitched glory into a balloon launched from the top of Sweden, a strange new eagle redeeming everything we did not accomplish with a fork, a spoon, and a fine bottle of aquavit. For this reason, we cried nothing when ice thickened in the shrouds, pulled us down, no matter how many times we fired the burners or cut ballast away from the gondola. Only a few hours out on the wind, we beached. The amorphous, still swollen balloon crept on the ice like a harpooned whale and died. On foot, we might have straggled south, found safety. Yet defeat stood too visible in that direction, so we pressed north, dragging our sleds over shifting floes. For months, as faces blackened with frostbite, we learned the meaning of white, the one color into which all time dissolves after the light of heaven turns away. The past wrapped around us, luminous as letters, scribbled in our heads, until even the ink of memory froze with each forward step. Broken voices peopled the horizon. Then they too stopped. Whatever differences we had among us when we started were bleached by the oncoming loneliness of an only imagined future. And the present, my friends, its cold alone remained for us to enter, and, of course, winter's black tent staked in the middle of each man's dream of summer. Toward the end, in all that whiteness going under, something else happened more rare than apple trees. We repeatedly brought each other back into this world, just by looking away from the gray into one another's eyes. Thank you for that poem. In the Winter Olympic Games in 2018 in South Korea, in Pyeongchang, it gave rise to the creating by me of a poetorial body, a very large body of written, visual, and spoken poetry that's up on the poetorialist.com site, if you're interested or haven't visited it ever. So that I contributed to the games. And here are two poems from that engagement that fit our theme. The first one is Bare Bones for the Olympic skeleton riders. Bony and alone in your skin, your skeleton and exoskeleton join, faces down, on a fast and frozen G-forced journey into glory and or eternity. Bare Bones. There's also a recording of me reading that too on there. And here's one for the dedicated to the Olympic cross-country skiers of those games. Locomotively. Your body a great engine, full steaming through deeply beautiful snowscapes, moving in long forward strides, tracking side to side, limbs, lungs, and spokes working so locomotively in all-part harmony, the way Scandinavians traveled with fort and fire through their frozen worlds 5 millennia ago. Of course, I was thinking of all sorts of northern climes, and I was up in Alaska on a wilderness journey, and this poem came from that. It's from back in 2009, one of many remarkable experiences, shaped not least by the cold air and the cold water and the cold fjords. So this is waterfalling. This is out kayaking in Ford's Terror, Endicott Arm, southeast Alaska. Pulled the kayak up to many thousands foot high fjord where water was falling, ice cold, and just pulled under that and let it shower me. Waterfalling is this poem that came as I was paddling away. Water falls thousands of feet down the sheer stone face. Fjorded light falls down the tree-banistered glacial ridge below the elbow of Endicott Arm as the rush of the race of the rapids rises up, revels up past earth and ears into the morning air. Water falling. Talk about aliveness. What a trip that was. What a voyage on a small fishing boat, 42-foot fishing boat. 3 men in a boat. Well, also in Southeast Alaska, this was at anchor off the Brothers, 2 islands called the Brothers and Frederick Sound. I saw close up many marvelous animals that live in the cold waters, and not least the great humpback whales of those cold depths. And I wrote a note to them, so moved was I by them, holding your breath. You hold your breath, have held your breath for 1,000 feet, 1,000 years down, through black and blue waters, blizzards, glaciers, barnacles, harpooners, still surviving, still returning to the surface. What magnificent creatures. Snow blows. Just a piece of mind from Morristown, New Jersey, one January, a moment that carried me back just like that to childhood. Maybe it'll do that for you. If you're from the north, any part of any north where it snows, snow blows. Snow blows about, white on gray, on this frosty country morning, slowly blanking out the landscape, dusting the air, the eyelashes with fresh, wet crystal feathers, and tasting through the breath of my mittened and mufflered childhood winters of mauve mountains, distant robins, imagined ice palaces. Crossing Central Park one Thanksgiving night, New York City, November 2018. Just me and the moon. Walked together. This Thanksgiving night, east to west, after a familiar feast. Across the entirely empty park, the green now dark bare heart of the city. The collar of my long coat turned up to the steep cold. Only the sound of my footsteps and visible breath audible in the air. Just me, heading home, and the moon, the unblinking moon, silent and silver bright over my shoulder. Gail Mazur's poem, M-A-Z-U-R, Ice. In the warming house, children lace their skates, bending, choked over their thick jackets. A Franklin stove keeps the place so cozy it's hard to imagine why anyone would leave, clumping across the frozen beach to the river. December's always the same at Ware's Cove. The first sheer ice, black, then white and deep, until the city sends trucks of men with wooden barriers to put up the boys' hockey rink. An hour of skating after school, of trying wobbly figure eights. An hour of distances moved backwards without falling. Then twilight, the warming house steamy with girls pulling on boots, their chafed legs aching. Outside, the hockey players keep playing, slamming the round black puck until it's dark, until supper. At night, a shy girl comes to the cove with her father. Although there isn't music, they glide arm in arm onto the blurred surface together, braced like dancers. She thinks she'll never be so happy, for who else will find her graceful, find her perfect, skate with her in circles outside the emptied rink forever? Thank you, Kel Mazur. Lovely. I like the surprise of that. Ted Kuser. Late February. The first warm day, and by mid-afternoon the snow is no more than a washing strewn over the yards, the bedding rolled in knots and leaking water, the white shirts lying under the evergreens. Through the heaviest drifts rise autumn's fallen bicycles, small carnivals of paint and chrome, the octopus and tilt-a-whirl beginning to turn in the sun. Now children, stiffened by winter and dressed somehow like old men, mutter and bend to the work of building dams. But such a spring is brief. By 5 o'clock, the chill of sundown, darkness, the blue TVs flashing like storms in the picture windows, the yard's gone gray, the wet dogs barking at nothing. Far off across the cornfield, staked for streets and sewers, the body of a farmer, missing since fall, will show up in his garden tomorrow, as unexpected as a tulip. Thank you, take coup, sir. Well, I, by the way, have some questions for you, dear listeners, as we go along about heat and cold. I'm curious about what experiences you've had where you had to endure a great deal of either heat or cold or both in your life, and what it felt like, and how it affected you, either for a while or maybe long after. What about greatly and memorably refreshing experiences of coolness, maybe a quenching drink of some kind, or a cool breeze from the sea or the mountains or elsewhere on your skin? What about a wonderfully warming moment, memory, as a child or as an adult, of your body getting needed or welcome warmth from the sun or under blankets or cradled in a parent's arms? Or maybe a very warming food you especially remember and the setting you were savoring it in. And the heat of passion. When have you most expressed it with another? What do you most viscerally recall? And does it kindle a flame again inside you as you summon it to your mind? Maybe to more than your mind. Is there any coldness of shoulder or look anyone ever gave to you? Or any time you felt an emotional chilliness inside you? And when you think of hot, what's the first image that springs to mind? And when you think of cold? Certainly always interesting how our bodies respond to just the thought to bring it back. Well, the thought of food played in as I curated our material, and here's Bill Holm's poem, Holm. Bread soup, an old Icelandic recipe. Start with the square heavy loaf steamed a whole day in a hot spring until the coarse rye, sugar, yeast grow dense as a black hole of bread. Let it age and dry a little, then soak the old loaf for a day in warm water flavored with raisins and lemon slices. Boil it until it is thick as molasses. Pour it in a flat white bowl. Ladle a good dollop of whipped cream to melt in its brown belly. This soup is alive as any animal, and the yeast and cream and rye will sing inside you after eating for a long time. Thank you, Bill Holm. Bread soup. That's from his collection, Playing the Black Piano, from 2004. Here's a recipe of mine from the Yucatan. Cold star soup. To a thick soup of stars, add half a cup of Milky Way and garnish with croutons of moon. Also have a cocktail for you. I was part of a Poetry on the Plate immersive dining event I actually created up here for a number of people in Rhode Island. And it included a special cocktail for the occasion. The cocktail was called the Fire Starter, calling all Hottentots. 2 ounces of good rye whiskey, half an ounce of nocino or nocello digestivo, half an ounce of Campari or Aperol, black walnut bitters, 1 large curled orange peel for garnish. Build it right in the glass. Add your spirits and 3 to 4 dashes of your bitters. Let them alchemize without stirring. Add 1 large ice cube and garnish with the citrus peel, burnt or unburnt. Serve, sip, and savor the inner kindling. The Fire Starter cocktail. On that note of fire water, I shared various pieces of mine and others from Alaska so far, and apropos of food and drink, I have to tell you this. This one involving, as it did, a novel use of an iceberg. So at one point, to get more water for the boat, because we didn't have any refrigeration, we had to hack some chunks of iceberg off. And these were 200-year-old pieces of ice. The icebergs, they're pure water, but they're very old, but super fresh. So surprised my compatriot and I surprised the captain this particular night when we were beginning our journey out, anchored way out out of port, with this whiskey and ice. The tip of an iceberg sits in a bowl on the small table in the cabin, pure and ancient ice, at least 100 times older than our 12-year-old single malt, that we chip into 3 glasses and sip slowly, reverently. Whiskey and ice. Yeah. That was a floating wilderness journey, and that was at anchor off Sanford Cove. If anybody has been to the Inside Passage, you may know that. Well, I absolutely had thought that somewhere I wanted to bring in a scene from the classic film Dr. Zhivago with Julie Christie that you may remember. And Omar Sharif, a David Lean's film. It's a great film. I actually want to go back and see it again now that I've been thinking about this scene. So, we talked about the cold and cinematic in the consciousness, and there's the Ice Palace scene. And if you haven't seen the film, it's a grand and glorious epic. So encouraging you to look at it. And it was filmed in many different places, including Spain. But the most memorable scene is when Zhivago, played by Sharif, and his lover, Lara, a truly luminous Julie Christie, eyes alone, return to their ice-covered home in Varicino, and was now seized and property of the people. But they open it back up, and they warm it back up, and everything melts, and it's totally enchanting. So I'm mentioning that. And then on the flip side, I was thinking, bone-chilling movies that we probably have seen in our lives. And I thought of, if you ask me what some of them would be that we might all know, I immediately thought of Alfred Hitchcock's Psycho from 1960, The Exorcist, that was 1973, the original Alien from 1979, The Shining with Jack Nicholson from 1980, and The Silence of the Lambs from 1999. Found those all pretty terrifying and definitely bone-chilling. So some of them I actually can't go back and watch. It's just too much. But they stay in the memory. I also thought of the Cold War, which who knows, maybe we're going back to that again, but who remembers that either as a child? I do, as growing up in that time, or as a grown-up if you did. And I came across John Philip Johnson's poem, There Have Come Soft Rains. In kindergarten during the Cold War, midday late bells jolted us, sending us single file into the hallway, where we sat, pressing our heads between our knees, waiting. During one of the bomb drills, Annette was standing. My mother said I would talk on and on about her, about how pretty she was. I still remember her that day, curly hair and pretty dress, looking perturbed the way little children do. Why, Annette? There's nothing to be upset about. The bombs won't get us. I've seen what's to come. It is the days, the steady pounding of days, like gentle rain, that will be our undoing. Well, I leapt from that to Dr. Strangelove talking about the films, and that was a 1964 movie. Another classic. I've seen it many times. Dr. Strangelove, or How I Learned to Stop Worrying and Love the Bomb. Cold War set military satire taking place in the corridors of power in Washington and the field of war as a madman threatens to turn the Cold War hot by launching a nuclear strike on Russia. So there was actually a book by that name, and they made it into a film. Kubrick made it into a film. So it begins, if you don't know it, by looking at the mind of the Brigadier General Jack Ripper, decorated Air Force general, who unfortunately has been driven quite insane with paranoia by the events of the Cold War, having become convinced there's a plot by the commies, quote, to sap and contaminate our precious bodily fluids. He decides to take action unilaterally and launch a preemptive strike on the USSR at the height of tensions between the two nations. And this is all from supersummary.com. That was give you a little lick on that. And what was also interesting as I looked elsewhere about this, and that I didn't know, this is from the University of Arts in London. Anna Castleton said, when it was released in '64, some critics attacked it for turning the potential destruction of the world into a joke. Others were angered at Stanley Kubrick's portrayal of the American military leadership as a bunch of psychotics. At the same time Kubrick made it, the Cold War was at its peak, and the running of the nuclear deterrent was opaque with secrecy, and yet I was to discover he instinctively uncovered what was really going on. He decided the satire was the only way you could possibly get to the essence of the insanity of the Cold War. And she mentions after this that 30 years later she did 2 BBC programs that investigated the Strategic Air Command in that time and found that it was all true. So how about that? How about that? Fiction it turns into fact. Well, it was fact, but he did it fictionally. So, I was thinking about the fact that no matter how freezing it gets, literally or figuratively, we can take comfort in certain constants, can't we? Like our spirits. This is blood freezes at -3 Celsius. Tears freeze at -30 Fahrenheit. Everything freezes except the spirit, which never freezes, never hardens, never deadens or ages, no matter the depth of our winters, the sudden plunge of our emotional temperatures, or the sometime extreme coldness, seeming frozenness of the world around us. Blood freezes. As we come into March now, March 2nd today, and dreams and portents of spring ahead, I'm certainly dreaming of it. A few poems to give us that transitional taste, perhaps. Still, however, sweater weather. This is Gary Snyder's poem, Kyoto, March. A few light flakes of snow fall in the feeble sun. Birds sing in the cold. A warbler by the wall. The plum buds, tight and chill, soon bloom. The moon begins first forth. A faint slice west at nightfall. Jupiter halfway high at the end of night meditation. The dove cry twangs like a bow. At dawn, Mr. Hai, dusted white on top, in the clear air folds of all the gullied green hills around the town are sharp. Breath stings. Beneath the roofs of frosty houses, lovers part, from tangle warm of gentle bodies under quilt, and crack the icy water to the face, and wake and feed the children and grandchildren that they love. Thank you, Gary Snyder. Here's mine, from Central Park, New York, 1 March 2015. The crabapple tree. Still winter bare, but buried, the crabapple tree in the park is leaved gray and rust, with a flock of robins enjoying the last fruits of their frozen world as it melts away into spring. All right, enough of the cold. Enough of all that cold. Let's turn the temperature way up. Let's turn up the heat outside, and let's bring our senses into different places. This place right now, this moment of Joseph Stroud's Pharaoh, the plaza of the gypsies, under the ruined castle, a spring pouring into a stone basin where burros and horses drink, since before the time of Cervantes. A taverna, fierce sunlight at noon, the plaza empty, absolute stillness, even the cicadas stunned by the heat. A plate of olives, goat cheese, cucumber, cobblestones, whitewashed walls, a day like marble, solstice, crushed rosemary, holding on with everything I have. Wheat fields the color of fawn, bread, black figs, gripping hard with mind and heart, clenching, holding on to what's human, this moment, this place where I make my strict joy. Thank you, Joseph Stroud. Well, there are places like that, roasting places, or toasty, or, very heated, overheated, or other places we've been, whose associations often and strongly include the temperature, the humidity, the viscerality of that kind of weather. And there's a poem of mine from Carthea, from the island of Kea in the Cyclades. I read these kinds of poems again to myself and to you right now. I begin to feel that intense Aegean sun, for example, and light, just thinking about it. This is a picnic among the ruins. Dark green sunglasses, bleach white kerchief to shield the neck from high burning sun. Butterflies, wild sage to mark and scent the way we descend down a steep, rough path to the re-rising ruins of Carthea. For a picnic, swim in mouthfuls of retsina below the pillars that templed Apollo and Athena eons ago. And how about that release we feel, that relief from a heat wave? Well, here's one of many experiences I can share. And what about yours? This is the breaking of a summer heat wave, of sun-flamed days, of jungle-heavy days and sweltering sleeps, of slow roastings and soakings of the body, sapping the desire to stir. Then the relief that flows in on a turning night tide of rain, laced with low rolls of thunder, the arriving coolness, the quenching coolness that pours in through the screen door, pools round my bare neck, arms, and legs, as I sit back with a splash of fresh, cold white wine and savor the contrast of overheatedness to easing coolness, all the bliss of simply this, the breaking. And there's the heat of desire, of wanting, that can spark a beautiful wildness in us, as men and women, but also, obviously, in animals. Jane Hirschfield has this poem, Heat. My mare, when she was in heat, would trample the fence line for hours, wearing the impatience in her feet into the ground. Not a stallion for miles, I'd assure her. Give it up. She'd widen her nostrils, sieve the wind for news, be moving again, her underbelly darkening with sweat. Then stop at the gate a moment, wait to see what I might do. Oh, I knew how it was for her, easily recognized myself in that wide lust, came to stand in the pasture just to see it played, offered a hand, a bucket of grain, a minute's distraction from passion, the most I gave. Then she'd return to what burned her, the fence, so hoping I might see, might let her free. I'd envy her then, to be so restlessly sure of heat and need and what it takes to feed the wanting that we are. Only a gap to open the width of a mare, the rest would take care of itself. Surely, I knew that, who had the power of bucket and bridle. She would beseech me, sidle up, be gone, as life is short. But desire is long. Thank you for that, Jane Hirschfield. There's a poem of mine from my exhibition Behind the Curtain. This is from the spring of 2018, one of the first exhibitions of that show, before it traveled around. Inside his desire, under the outer skin of his pleasure, inside the greater heat of his passion, burns a wild, untamable flame, a wild, unnameable fire of deep, unquenchable desire. I have this next piece is from the Yucatan. It's from the Mayan coast. It's almendro, almond tree. You know, that part of the Yucatan where the heat can be so beautifully infusing of nature, at least to me. And I was witnessing this beautiful almond tree. Broad, dense, and moss-colored, the leaves of the sun-roasted almond tree offer a cool refuge from the unrelenting afternoon, except for the ember-red leaves that have caught fire and, soon to crinkle and fall, hang down at intervals from the lush branches like so many paper lanterns glowing for an evening fiesta. Almendro. I mentioned a few times about contrast and having sort of both experiences and appreciation of one to the other at times. And so I was musing on that, and that led me to think of hearths and laundry and locomotives, steam engines, among other things. So here's a few things around, a few poems around those. This is the hearth. The old oven in the cold night kitchen, whose wide mouth I open to warm my chilled hands as I cook a simple supper, sip a humble glass of wine, I feel sure, the same kind of comfort others through time, farmers to storytellers, hermits and wayfarers felt around the good fortune of a sheltered fire and the promise of body-filling food on a deep winter's eve by a welcomely glowing hearth. Well, what is as lovely as fresh bread warm from the oven? I'm thinking fresh laundry, and here they somehow paired up for me. Freshly made. This is a poem from Central Park. The sheets tumble out of the dryer like warm loaves of bread. Flour-white towels and pillowcases emerge, toasty on the cheek, all leavened for the waiting bed, for the bright-walled bath, for a fresh cycle of sleeping and dreaming, waking and loving. Freshly made. And this is from a hike along the Union Pacific Rail Trail one summer in Park City, Utah. And imagining as I went along on that hike, it's called Iron Horses. They steamed black and white through the sun and snow, pulling iron-wheeled cars of coal, ore, tin-type men and women to and from this silver mining town on now-vanished rails. Though if I close my eyes for a moment as I coast down the trail, I can almost hear the wild call, smell the fire-stoked scent of the darkly shining iron horses streaming through the clear mountain air. Well, as I also thought on things of or involving great heat, I thought of forges and blacksmiths. And this is a poem about a fire wielder I know, a dear friend whose name means blacksmith, kind of blacksmith, and who he did try his hand at it back in time, and whose nature I used the metaphor for. Our farrier, for Dennis Farrier, this was on his 73rd birthday in 2015. Man of iron, of great fire, man of worshipful company, shaper, swager, welder of many things, complex to simple, essential, useful, a Vulcan with his volcano of flowing heart, fierce thought, a Vishvakarma, Gofanan, Tubalcain, Ogun, who has sculpted 7 remarkable decades and been sculpted remarkably by them and beyond. Today you smith on, strike on, ecstatically, in forging heat, in a bright shower of living sparks. Our farrier. I was thinking too of volcanoes and lava, and that brought me to think of Pompeii. And Jen Blair, I found this poet I did not know, wrote a poem about the excavations there, and gave sort of a glimpse in her own poetic way through the thoughts and feelings of one of the excavators, Giuseppe Fiorelli, in 1863. And that's the title of the poem, February 3, 1863, Pompeii. The wells went dry, but they did not suspect even then, walking to prayers, to market, swimming along in strange morning light, whose quality was already changing. I kneel down and fish out the bones carefully with slender tongs before pouring gesso in the hardened ash. Some sculpt out of the air, but I persist in believing there are forms already present, absences which are too telling, a chance to become intimate with curdled hands or even the downcast eyelashes of the woman and man and child long ago cast down. Perhaps they will have amulets and goddesses in arm, or perhaps they will hold nothing except themselves, that one last possession, all limbs pulled in as if to ask the gods for respite now that their small bodies inhabit even tighter boundaries. Frescoes, vases, temples, carbonized loaves of bread, important, but enough of artifacts. I want to see a living face. Thank you, Jen Blair. Well, I love the mood and viscerality of Mark Strand's poem, very tangible, visceral poem, what to think of. Think of the jungle, the green steam rising. It is yours. You are the Prince of Paraguay. Your minions kneel deep in the shade of giant leaves while you drive by benevolent as gold. They kiss the air that moments before swept over your skin and rise only after you've passed. Think of yourself almost a god, your hair on fire, the bellows of your heart pumping. Think of the bats rushing out of their caves like a dark wind to greet you, of the vast nocturnal cities of lightning bugs floating down from Minas Gerais, of the coral snakes, of the crimson birds with emerald beaks, of the tons and tons of morpho butterflies filling the air like the cold confetti of paradise. Thank you, Mark Strand. Well, as I kept turning up my own temperature of material, I was thinking, and I was giving you a couple of films, but if you haven't seen it, from the 60s, classic British science fiction film, The Day the Earth Caught Fire. Very interesting, extremely well done. It's I would say one of the greatest doomsday movies, if we could sort of put that in quotes, of its kind. And it's about when the U.S. and the Soviet Union simultaneously set off nuclear explosions. London's Daily Express begins to report on bizarre weather changes around the world. But when reporters dig deeper, they discover that the blast have knocked Earth off its axis and sent it hurtling toward the sun. Now, as scorching heat and devastating floods plague the planet, cities explode in chaos, and mankind is left with one last hope, a final massive detonation that will either rebalance Earth's orbit or destroy the world forever. Well, it has great dialogue, chilling realism, and one of the most provocative endings in sci-fi history. I won't spoil it for you, so if you want to look it up, you can. The Day the Earth Caught Fire. Okay, so we're going to wind out with a small handful of things now. Autumn by John Clare. The thistledown's flying. Though the winds are all still, on the green grass now lying, now mounting the hill, the spring from the fountain now boils like a pot. Through stones, past the counting, it bubbles, red hot. The ground parched and cracked is like overbaked bread. The greensward is all racked as bents dried up and dead. The fallow fields glitter like water indeed, and gossamers twitter, flung from weed unto weed. Hilltops like hot iron glitter bright in the sun, and the rivers we're eyeing burn to gold. As they run, burning hot is the ground, liquid gold is the air. Whoever looks round sees eternity there. John Clare. It goes way back in time. I don't know what date, but way back. You can tell. I didn't know about him before. Rockwell Kent spent a sojourn in the remote islands, on a remote island, and I think Fox Island in Alaska by Resurrection Island back in 1919, and he took his young son at that time. And he went there for 7 months, and he lived in a little cabin that was not fully watertight or airtight from the crazy weather. And he said something marvelous when he came back, because it was very transformative, that experience for him as a man, as an artist, as a being. And he said in this letter, "It has always been hard for me to understand myself, to know why I work and love and live. Yet it is fortunate that such matters find a way of caring for themselves. I came to Alaska because I love the North. I crave snow-topped mountains, dreary wastes, and the cruel northern sea with its hard horizons at the edge of the world where infinite space begins. Here skies are clearer and deeper, and, for the greater wonders they reveal, 1,000 times more eloquent of the eternal mystery than those of softer lands." Rockwell Kent. And here's Linda passed down the Sonoran Desert, January. "In this unfinished landscape of space and sky, they tell me flowers will bloom later, and in strange colors, vivid as fever dreams. They tell me the saguaro cactus will seem beautiful, that their creature shapes are of this earth, though they have the look of another planet, and the lizards, live outcroppings of the rock, the iguanas and horned toads, and also of this time, this endless place. Stay a while, they tell me. The green hills back east will seem as nothing after these smoky hills. The thirst you will learn here is like no other thirst. For the first time you will understand what the sun, that burning thistle, asks, what water so briefly answers." Thank you, Linda Pasta. Here's one of mine from Italy, from Positano. Vino bianco con pesce. The vino locale arrives, fizzy, white, filled with peaches, mozzarella and lemon leaves, local fishes, orata, spigola, all grilled to blissfulness. The cold melon, a succulent kiss full of dolce vita. We watch the sun in the shade, the silky bathers who bask and wade before we launch back the way we came. And one more from Greece, from an Aegean summer, another time, something warm and lyrical for you, for us. Music among the ruins. A solo flute floats upwind into our ears, with the sound of waves smoothing over stones on the shore, with rushes of sea wind through the sun-baked, time-baked ruins, with the imagined voices of mythic gods and deep blue siren songs. Ron Paget, poem. I'm in the house. It's nice out. Warm sun on cold snow. First day of spring or last of winter. My legs run down the stairs and out the door. My top half here typing. Thank you, Ron Paget. And next to last. Toward an Organic Philosophy, Kenneth Rexroth. The glow of my campfire is dark red and flameless. The circle of white ash widens around it. I get up and walk off in the moonlight, and each time I look back, the red is deeper and the light smaller. Scorpio rises late with Mars caught in his claw. The moon has come before them, the light like a choir of children in the young laurel trees. It is April. The shad, the hot-headed fish, climbs the rivers. There is trillium in the damp canyons. The fetid adder's tongue lolls by the waterfall. There was a farm at this campsite once. It's almost gone now. There were sheep here after the farm, and fire. Long ago burned the redwoods out of the gulch, the Douglas fir off the ridge. Today the soil is stony and incoherent. The small stones lie flat and plate the surface like scales. 20 years ago the spreading gully toppled the big oak over onto the house. Now there's nothing left but the foundations hidden in poison oak, and above on the ridge 6 lonely, ominous fence posts. The redwood beams of the barn make a footbridge over the deep, waterless creek bed. The hills are covered with wild oats, dry and white by midsummer. I walk in the random survivals of the orchard. In a patch of moonlight, a mole shakes his tunnel like an angry vein. Orion walks waist deep in the fog coming in from the ocean. Leo crouches under the zenith. There are tiny hard fruits already on the plum trees. The purity of the apple blossoms is incredible, and as the wind dies down, their fragrance clusters around them like thick smoke. All the day they roared with bees. In the moonlight, they're silent and immaculate. And to close for now, till we meet again, is a pay into the elements and what they can touch and change and evoke inside of us. I have an originally scored musical version of this. You can find it on my site, pleinairpoetry.com, my other site, or I can point you to it if you pop me a note, but I'll just read it to you for now. The elements are here to connect us to the pure power and wonder of nature, its presence, its miraculousness, from the winds to the rains, the fiercest heat to the wildest cold, and to all the purely elemental, powerful, wonderful inside us, inside our bodies, spirits, imaginations, the forces of outer and inner nature that challenge and inspire us, surround and speak to us, to every man, woman, and child among us. These elements, these firmaments of contrast and contest, of humbling and ennobling energy. Thank you again, each and all, for leaning in, floating in, feeling in. And to those of you who listen in faithfully, I'm glad to have you, a fine group of open-eared, open-eyed, and minded enthusiasts. If you have a theme you'd like to see explored, or a question, comment, or kudo, send me a note. I'd be delighted to hear from you. My email is colin@thepoetorialist.com. If you'd like to express thanks for this show or another with a donation, that'd be wonderful, since everyone helps support my work on these free programs. You can contribute by Venmo to fivefold@pipeline.com, or directly through my site, thepoetorialist.com, in the Donate tab, or simply by mail to me at P.O. Box 1032, Westerly, Rhode Island, 02891. If you're a patron who'd like to host me as a working artist, as a poet in residence on location for a given span of time, please reach out and we'll explore the opportunity. Likewise, to be a virtual artist in residence, poetic presence for an online community. Open to that. Meanwhile, you can hear all the broadcasts online, on YouTube, on the Floating Poetry playlist. I do hope you'll lean in soon again. Until then, dear listeners, here's to fully experiencing all the Fahrenheits of life, hot to cold, inside and out, of the body, the heart, the spirit, the power of nature, and the sensuousness and aliveness to be found in meeting them in your days, and again in your sense memories. Goodbye for now, and good spirits.